There is a precise moment when a man loses the game without even realizing it. Not when she turns away, not when the answer is no, but when he silently abandons himself, the instant desire appears. Because from that second on, he is no longer choosing. He is negotiating his own existence. What part of you collapses when you want something badly? From what emotional position do your words truly emerge? And what if failure is not in what you ask, but in the posture from which you ask it? The modern man was conditioned to believe that pleasing is power. Smile more, agree more, adapt more. But the more he chases approval, the farther he drifts from the place where respect is born. His body betrays him. The shoulders fall without notice. The breath shortens. The voice loses density. And in that instant, without a single word spoken, his value has already dropped. It is not the sentence that breaks. It is the axis. Jung would say the conflict does not occur outside, but in the lie between what you wish to become and what you fear to lose. When a man asks from lack, his shadow leads the gesture. And the shadow always communicates insecurity, even when the mouth dresses the message in politeness. She does not hear your words first. She feels your position before she hears you. The female nervous system reads micro-tensions with brutal precision, minimal hesitation, invisible tremor, altered rhythm. Everything is registered. What feels like a nuance to you is a complete emotional map to her. You did not lose because you spoke incorrectly. You lost because you spoke from below. The mistake is not wanting, the mistake is needing. Nietzsche understood this mercilessly. Whoever acts from need is already chained, even while believing he chooses. When you seek approval, you abandon leadership. When you over-explain, you are already negotiating your place. What happens when the mind stops obeying desire? Cialdini called it silent consistency. Here it is called presence without fracture. Human beings trust coherence between energy and action more than any speech. And women especially follow the man whose internal stability does not depend on the response he receives. This is not about shouting. This is not about imposing. It is about not wavering. Recent studies show that women detect male insecurity in less than 1 second through speech rhythm, micro-expressions, and breathing variations. This does not pass through logic. It is biological. Her body decides long before her rational mind forms an opinion. That is why so many men do everything right and still lose everything when they finally desire something. Because when the moment of asking arrives, their center shifts. And whoever loses his center loses the game. Here is the truth that changes everything. You do not need to be more pleasant. You need to be inevitable. Imagine 2 men. One asks as if waiting for authorization. The other moves as if the decision were already made. One contracts his space, the other expands it, and she perceives it effortlessly. This is the point where anxiety turns into axis, where words stop carrying the weight, and that weight moves into presence. Where communication no longer begs, it leads. And this is where the invisible mechanism begins to operate, the one that makes a woman not only listen, but gradually adjust her behavior to your rhythm. What if real power is not in controlling the other, but in mastering the impulse to be loved? The first poison is pre-validation. Before asking, the man has already apologized internally. Am I bothering her? Should I say this differently? That internal dialogue creates micro-fractures that leak into the body, and the body does not know how to lie. Attraction does not die from what you say. It dies from how you surrender to doubt before speaking. Observe this. If your chest contracts, if your voice rises half a tone, if you rush, the interaction has already collapsed before the first verb. Recovering this is not a social technique. It is an internal realignment. There is a biological root behind all of this. The female brain is wired to detect emotional stability under pressure. It does not seek perfection. It seeks center. A man internally chaotic, no matter how brilliant, activates a silent alarm. This is why rhythm matters more than content. Natural pauses, stable tone, relaxed face. This translates into emotional shelter, and where there is shelter, there is interest. Many men commit the same error. They sprint to create closeness. They believe rapid openness generates connection. But openness without rhythm destroys tension, And without tension, magnetism dies. Closeness does not create connection. Rhythm creates connection. One step, pause. Another step. You speak, then you go silent. You allow her to breathe the information, then you move again. When the dynamic is conducted rather than impulsive, leadership emerges by itself. What happens when a man stops chasing approval and starts observing? Reactivity is the true enemy. Answering too fast, overreacting, allowing the environment to move you. All of that screams, I am not in control of my center. Train the basics, lower the initial energy, speak a little less than you want. Do not react immediately. Well-used silence is density. A well-placed pause is authority. First value filter. Speak less. Never justify. Maintain neutral posture. Use silence as a tool, not as a refuge. When these four align, you do not need to prove anything. The environment rearranges itself. The invisible law is simple. Whoever enters feeling inferior has already lost. Asking from the sensation of being beneath creates an emotional negotiation field, and she feels it long before you try to disguise it with courtesy. Women do not follow men who ask permission to exist. They follow men who occupy their place. This is not poetry. It is evolutionary psychology. Direction is not explained. It is embodied. Ask without apologizing for wanting. Speak without justifying intention. Move without announcing that you will move. That is the axis. The way you hold yourself even when the atmosphere shifts. A man with center does not raise his voice, does not over-argue, does not accelerate. He simply is. And when he is, the environment reorganizes around him. What if fear is the most common disguise of desire? Real command is never direct. It is implicit. It moves the interaction without declaring war. A clear phrase that signals direction. A normalization that presents it as natural. And a continuity that advances without waiting for permission. You do not push. You invite from a place where you are already walking. The most serious error appears here, revealing intention before revealing value. Many confuse sincerity with urgency, and urgency always communicates need. She does not pull away because of what you want. She pulls away because of how you show that you want it. Hide intention, not presence. Let the atmosphere speak before your objective does. There is another critical factor, behavioral scarcity. This is not about disappearing. It is about not giving yourself completely without being invited. Total availability kills reciprocity. Total absence kills connection. The exact point is strategic presence. You give a little, she advances a little. That space creates attraction. And here, the definitive turn occurs. You do not convince her. You make her feel that she chose. The female mind seeks emotional coherence, not logical pressure. When you create atmosphere, you allow choice. And when she feels she chose, she commits. Comment. Cold mind. If you understood what I mean, the mirror principle works through absence. You propose. You retreat half a step. She fills the space. You guide. She follows. Pure science. Confident posture, slow tone, behavioral scarcity exponentially increase compliance. Every gesture defines whether you are followed or merely assisted. Everything converges into one strategy. The half-open door, you plant, you distance, you return with firmness. Resistance collapses on its own. She no longer feels she is giving in. She feels she is participating. And that is where the game inverts. The weight leaves the words, it enters presence. You stop asking from need, you begin inviting from inevitability. The man who masters this process does not force. He directs, he does not push, he positions, he does not beg, he structures. The man who controls his own value always controls the interaction. The final turning point comes when you understand that posture comes before intention. Women do not respond to what you want. They respond to what you represent. You do not demand respect. You become impossible to ignore. You exit the anxiety pattern, the validation loop, the doubt cycle. You enter calculated masculine direction. Women do not seek perfection. They seek center. They do not follow words. They follow rhythm. When your body, your voice, and your intention align, the response stops being chaotic. It becomes predictable. The final truth is brutally simple. The trick is not manipulation. It is mastery of your internal state. Machiavelli understood this without mercy. Humans judge more by the eyes than the hands. She does too, and even more. She feels your control or your fracture before you even inhale deeply. She detects your instability before you register your fear. Nothing is small. Nothing is irrelevant. Everything communicates. That is why your next step is not learning lines. It is rebuilding your axis, firm posture, slowed rhythm, clear direction, implicit command. When you stop reacting to the environment and begin shaping it, you cross the point of no return. And that is where the last truth appears, the one most men refuse to accept. He who masters his impulse governs his destiny. He who does not will forever ask permission even to desire. Because in the end, as Machiavelli warned with cold clarity, the man who does not govern his own mind will always be governed by it. There is a silent rupture that happens inside most men long before any words are spoken. It is the moment when desire stops being an impulse and becomes a need. From that second on, behavior is no longer led by clarity. It is hijacked by urgency, and urgency is always visible to those who know how to look. Schopenhauer warned that the human being is only free up to the point where desire stops commanding him. After that, the man does not act, he reacts. And a reactive man never leads. He only responds to the pressure of what he fears to lose. She does not reject your words. She rejects the emotional state from which they were born. That is why training phrases is useless if your nervous system enters bowed. You can memorize every psychological trigger in the world. If your breathing is short, if your shoulders collapse, if your gaze seeks permission instead of setting direction, the message is already broken before it leaves your mouth. Real communication begins in the body, not in speech. What happens when love becomes a form of control? The man who still depends on female validation lives internally divided. He wants to lead, but he fears losing. He wants to advance, but he hesitates. He wants to desire, but he apologizes for desiring. That internal contradiction creates an unstable vibration that a woman detects instantly. And instability never commands. Women do not follow intentions. They follow solid internal structures. When you speak slowly, when you hold eye contact without pressure, when you pause without anxiety, your body transmits something no sentence can imitate: emotional dominance. And emotional dominance is the invisible foundation of all real magnetism. Nietzsche would call this organized will. Not the chaotic will that begs, but the will that moves forward without asking permission from its own fear. The rushed man chases results. The centered man builds inevitability. Here appears another fatal mistake: delivering too much energy before sufficient tension exists. This destroys polarity. It turns presence into noise. It creates accessibility without value. Tension is the field where attraction is born. Rhythm is the instrument that sustains it. Without rhythm, everything becomes emotional noise. And what if silence said more than 1,000 words? Silence is not emptiness. Silence is structure. It is in the pause that her mind begins to work. It is there that your image forms without you having to push it. The man who talks non-stop robs the woman of the chance to feel, and where there is no sensation, there is no desire. Lowering speed changes everything. Fewer words, more presence, less anxiety, more density. When you stop chasing the response begins moving toward you. There is a point where interaction stops being exchange and becomes conduction. And that point is born not from insistence, but from stability. The stable man does not demand reciprocity. He provokes it. From here on, the game changes its nature. It is no longer about conquering. It is about sustaining a field where the woman, on her own, begins to reposition herself in front of you. And when that happens, you are no longer asking for anything. You are simply confirming a movement she already initiated. A moment arrives when a man must decide whether he will continue reacting to the environment or become the point from which the environment organizes itself. That step is not social. It is internal. It does not happen in conversation. It happens in the way you position yourself in front of your own desire. The greatest male self-sabotage is not the fear of rejection. It is the urgency to be chosen. When a man wants to be chosen, he has already renounced choosing. He has already handed over the steering wheel of his emotional life. He has already agreed to negotiate his value for an external answer. And she perceives it immediately. Not because she analyzes it, but because she feels it. From the moment a man stops needing to be chosen, something irreversible happens inside him. The silence that once felt empty becomes weight. The pauses that once created anxiety become gravity. His presence no longer asks, it occupies. And what occupies does not negotiate. Women do not cooperate with explanations. They cooperate with stable internal architecture. They do not respond to speeches. They respond to emotional organization. Where there is center, there is magnetism. Where there is coherence, there is following. Where there is internal command, attraction becomes inevitable. What if real power was never about controlling the woman, but about no longer being controlled by the need for her? This is where the false war between desire and fear finally collapses. The man is no longer driven by emptiness. He moves from fullness. He no longer accelerates to escape silence. He no longer talks to kill tension. He no longer insists to avoid loss. Because now he understands the unbreakable sequence. Need creates pressure. Pressure creates resistance. Center creates following. This is not about becoming cold. It is about becoming stable. This is not about disappearing. It is about stopping the chase. This is not about manipulation. It is about embodiment of direction so clear it requires no explanation. Jung would say, this is the moment the man stops projecting his shadow onto the woman. He no longer seeks salvation through her. He no longer drags his lack into desire. For the first time, desire becomes clean, without desperation, without begging, without emotional hunger. And when desire stops being hunger, it becomes power. A woman feels when you are no longer a man who needs something from her to stand. She feels when you are no longer searching for validation, but sharing a trajectory. And that shift is not subtle, it is radical. Because now your presence does not invade, your presence organizes, your gaze does not plead, your gaze affirms. Your silence is not empty. Your silence carries weight. Schopenhauer was right. The man who does not govern his impulse will always be a slave to what he desires. But when a man takes possession of his own desire, he stops being dragged by it and begins using it as creative force. This is the point where everything inverts. You no longer walk asking if you may advance. You advance and the world rearranges. You no longer measure your value by external reaction. Your value becomes the frame from which reactions emerge. That is presence, that is axis, that is silent power. And this is why, as Machiavelli warned with cold precision, the man who masters his own mind masters his destiny. And the man who does not master himself is condemned to spend his life begging for affection, approval, and fragments of attention.